everyone. Good morning. Welcome to day two, panel two of Urban Arc 2025. Um, we are here to talk about the ways in which a just climate, just climatic transition, development transitions kind of impact livelihoods and employment. And we have five really interesting presentations today, which range from the intersections of livelihood transitions caused by India's energy needs from coal mines to the transition of sites that were extracted and now are neglected. Mangalore's auto rickshaw drivers, waste workers whose demographic makeup kind of shows how drastically climatic transitions are impacting the workforce. And a case of a software workers union in Kerala whose presence and struggle shows the transition of the state's own economic impetus and changing politics with it. So, a lot of diverse set of livelihoods and employment structures represented on the panel, which kind of highlights just how diverse India's own requirements and policy thinking around just transitions should be. And so I'm really excited to be moderating this and to be listening to the presentations. Just to note to everyone presenting that we have about 12 minutes for your presentations and about 5 to 7 minutes for questions right after. So we'll have a colleague keeping time, and I will try and give you as much time as possible on this. Um, Maybe we can start with Shrishti Mishra, who is joining us online, who will be talking about the urbanizing coalfields in India and the livelihood transition there. And for everyone who's joining us online, if you'd like to drop in questions for the panelists as they're speaking, please do, but we'll take them after they're finished presenting. Shishti, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm Srishti. I'm a PhD student at IIM Ahmedabad. And this work that I'm presenting today is part of my thesis. This particular presentation is basically about changing labor relations. And the title of this presentation is Are the Peasants Reporting for Dipti? This is a word that came up in the field site and sort of shows how there is a temporality around labor that's introduced into the field because of extraction. But I'm looking at this, I'm looking at the everyday lives of depeasantization in urbanizing coalfields in India. So this is the lens, the larger theoretical lens that I have used, which is of urbanization and new forms of urbanization and new ways of thinking about the urban. So just before I start, I'll briefly give a motivation for this thesis and this work. So I am from Jharkhand myself, and this is something that's always inspired me to understand as to despite its rich coal reserves which are in such demand and which continue to be in such demand, why does Jharkhand continue to be underdeveloped? So this was the frame with which I went into the field site, and So I'll just briefly give an overview of the field site. This is the North Karanpura coalfield in Jharkhand, and it's situated across 4 districts: Ranchi, Hazaribagh, Chatra, and Latehar. So it's a massive coalfield. It's spread over 1,200, almost 1,200 square kilometers, which is uh, it's just massive, and it has almost 20 billion reserves. So the image on the right shows the many coal blocks that have been carved out of this region. And this on the left side, which is the pink coal blocks, these are the Tandwa coal blocks, which have already been, which have been under extraction since 1960s, 70s, and 80s under the state-led model of developmentalism. And over here, this yellow, these two coal blocks is where I have sort of focused my work on. This is the Pankadi Barwadi coal block, which was allocated to NTPC. And NTPC is India's largest power producer. It produces power through it produces thermal power, basically. So even Pankadi Barwadi is a massive coal block, and it's spread over 4,600 hectares. And it has a production capacity of 18 million metric tons. The peak rated capacity, it's yet to be achieved. So a brief history of the Pankadi Barwadi project itself is that it was allocated to NTPC in 2004. And after that, survey work started, but there was a lot of resistance from the community, and there were massive protests, which also led to violence, and there were police firings, and people lost their lives. So it was a major protest, which there were other reasons as well, but it contributed to the project being delayed by almost a decade. So finally, the project produced its first rake of coal in 2016. So some I sort of went in with some of the narratives that I had gathered from media reports and from broadly talking to people at that point of time. So just briefly to give a view of the detail of the fieldwork. This was a qualitative fieldwork and conducted over almost 3 years now. So I started in 2021, October to January, October 21 to January 22, and then more sustained fieldwork in 2023. So October 2023 to March 2024. And I am from Hazaribagh, so I am at home currently, and I have sort of gone and visited the field multiple times since then. So broadly, the starting narratives were of resistance, and this was the idea of jaan denge par zameen nahi denge. We'll give our lives, but we'll not give our land. So this was the idea that we'll resist dispossession at any cost. And under this was also the narrative of a changing livelihood, changing relations of production. So not wanting to lose, not wanting to become a worker from a proletariat. But since then, a lot of change has happened. The mining work has progressed. And I've looked at this from the lens of the urban. So this involves looking at the spatial churn, but also how it is transforming the society. So with land dispossession and coming up of the mining infrastructure, so this includes the various mining pits, the sites of resettlement, which are sort of now densifying, and it itself presents a lot of opportunity for people to show entrepreneurship, and that's what is happening also. And another dimension is the dimension of coal evacuation. So coal transport is one of the major dimensions to this transformation. So I'm looking, in this particular work, I'm looking at the terms of depeasantization, which was also articulated in these narratives of resistance, that we are not going to give our lands. So the starting frame that I start from is that going from the landholding peasant to the mining worker. And these are some of the narratives that I'll quickly share. Some of the sort of contrasting narratives in a way. So the first one is basically talking about अपना जमीन देके अपना स्वामित्व खो दिया, and now they'll do dihadi for the company. So the idea is that they've lost their ownership, they're being masters of themselves by losing their land, and now they are going to be slaving for the company in a sense. Then this was from one of the respected local activists. The second was from a young person who was a garage owner, and he was sort of pointing at his friend and saying, almost in a scoffing manner, this person is doing farming, and if it doesn't rain, his crops are destroyed, he is destroyed. If the company doesn't give him work, then he is done. And about himself, he was saying, "Mera haath ka kaam hai. I can earn 10,000 in a day." So haath ka kaam meaning he works at a garage. And the third narrative is of a land loser who, using the compensation sum that he received, he bought a JCB, which is an earth moving machinery used for excavation. And he was saying that he was running from pillar to post, trying to get his machinery, which is a single machinery that he owned, to get it deployed in the company's work. But he was saying that it's only possible for those who are politically corrected. So these are some of the contexts that came up in relation to the changing dimensions of work in the field side. So I do take that first dimension and analyze it, which is that, yes, of course, I mean, this was a Krishi Pradhan Kshetra, agrarian society. So people are losing their lands and they are getting work. So that is a major dimension. But something very interesting and innovation sort of has been introduced into extraction work in India, and there is a long legacy of public sector enterprises coming to Jharkhand and involved in urbanization through creation of townships and more like more stable formal work. This is the legacy of CIL in Jharkhand, which many people spoke about, that CIL has given government jobs, even if it at lower grades, they have given those government jobs. There is that security in their mind. But Lahiri Dutt has also shown that CCL also has employed informal workers, although the proportion is less. And in my conversations, I found out that CCL is also eventually headed on the MDO route, and I'll now describe what this MDO route is. So the Pankri Barwadi project has been allocated to NTPC, which is also a public sector enterprise. But interestingly, it has no competence in mining, and it has been allocated this coal block for captive mining for power production, but it has outsourced its entire mining work to a private enterprise through this mining developer come operator model, which is a subcontracting model. And now there is confusion about whether this is a Sarkari or MDO company. So there is a precarity that has been introduced. But in addition to this, uh, what I try to uncover is, are all peasants now workers? So there's this idea of progressive rural politics, and scholars have argued that it also needs to recognize difference and pay attention to the different classes of labor, which include petty commodity producers, petty capitalists in the rural economy. And there is differential exploitation within this neoliberal model. So those who are at a better class and caste position can negotiate better options, while those who are landless agricultural wage workers, they end up getting more exploited. But then within this, I wanted to understand who really is the exploiter, who is doing this exploitation. Is it just the company, given that there is this model? So what emerged was that what I call not so petty capitalists. So this whole enterprise, which is such a massive operation, it has been tendered and subcontracted into, there are many small work that get subcontracted. So from very big contractors to what are called pettydars, which is a combination of petty contractors or petty thekedars, which has turned into pettydar. Then the other related to this is that all of this work has sort of been, it is alleged that this work has been subcontracted to political parties. So what I was talking about, the evacuation work, if there are like 500 trucks that are running every day, people say that 100 have been given to Congress, 100 to JMM, and 50 to BJP, and so. And in order to get work, you sort of have to become a karyakarta of the company. So this is what Chatterjee has also conceptualized as the political society, which has emerged in order to manage the effects of primitive accumulation, or what can be considered accumulation by dispossession. And I have some briefly, I'll share some concluding thoughts. So it's far more complex than a simple framing of going from landed peasantry to worker. And existing structural differences within the community translates into these new forms within the new economy. And I'll just take 1 minute to talk about this radical possibility that was articulated in the field site, that instead of these companies coming in and taking up the extraction work, why is extraction work not given to new forms of organization within the community, like the community organizing itself and taking over the extraction? So these are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Shristi, for that. Can I open up the floor for questions on Shristi's presentation? And as people start to kind of think about that, Shristi, I had a question for you. I think that was a really excellent presentation. Thank you. You gave a really concise kind of story about how you've disappeared from the screen. Yeah. From how this kind of transitions kind of taking place. I was wondering whether you could talk to us a little bit more about um, this petidar class of people that you're trying to make an argument about seeing them for their class dynamics. Who are these
Yeah,
people who are able to actually be on the side of the new forms of extractive capitalism that are coming versus those
yeah,
who want to stay to more of a rural identity? Can you help us understand what the kind of sociological features of those people may be? Who's
yeah.
able to kind of win from this news story versus those who are at the receiving or losing end of it?
Yeah. So this sort of ties into the structural differences within agrarian society in India, and broadly we know the skewed land holding that is a feature. So uh, within this community also, that is the pattern of land holding. There are these few families who do own more than, like, some own almost 50 acres of land, and but the larger pattern of land holding is small and marginal land holding. So in exchange for land, people are getting around 24 lakhs per acre. And this was one of the ways for the company to convince people that, we'll give you this compensation sum, and you can purchase machinery, you can purchase vehicles, and it will get employed in the extraction work. So this is not here that dimension of prestige of work also comes in, which I sort of quoted in the first quote that I shared, which was going from owner or a master to doing the hari. So this really sort of bridges that transition without such attack on prestige. And as owners, you can employ, I mean, you may be working, you may be operating that machinery, but it's still, you're sort of an owner. So this is one example, but other than that, like, there are the many smaller segments. For example, even in the settlement work, for supply of water, that's also something that gets tendered out, and it is coming through many, like, many layers of subcontracting. So you don't really know who you are being who's subcontracting out this to you, and who is your employer. So but there's a larger company is used as the overall overarching employer, even though there are these multiple layers that
Okay.
are at work.
Okay. Thank you. There's a question in the audience.
Thank you so much. Chandni Singh here from IIHS. That was a very thought provoking presentation. My question is around, if you now look forward, as India is now on this route of decarbonizing, coal going down, this whole conversation about just transitions. And in that is the conversation around what is going to happen to some of these jobs. So I just want to know from your own fieldwork, where do you see this trend going towards as coal-based jobs start falling off? Are you already seeing new forms of these employer-employee relations changing? All of that. Just want to hear your thoughts, because I think it's
Sure.
the way you. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for your question. Actually, so that was the frame that I, initially went in with, that there is this pressing issue of climate change, and India is moving, sort of getting further entrenched in coal. And I mean, in terms of literature, like, more I read on this, there are also ideas of, I mean, this has been conceptualized as transitioning to more coal-based energy in India's context also. And also sort of uh, uh, examining the idea that, is there really a transition? I mean, more or newer forms of energy may come in, but older forms of energy still continue to be used, even even more so than they were being used. But that aside, I mean, in terms of employment relations, this was one of the dimensions that I went in with, to understand what people are thinking for their future. uh, that like, this transition happening from agrarian to a industrial society. uh, but I mean, what I discussed previously also, that it's not all there's a significant population of landless workers who were sort of working then also, and they have gone into a more exploitative uh, economy industry. But those who have who were landed owners, they had sort of they were sort of moving away, like they were sending their children outside to study. So there was that migration that was happening, that social mobility that was happening. And now they are not completely dependent on uh, the coal economy for jobs, but they are the ones who are sort of employing more vehicles, or more they are the ones who are sort of getting the thekas, the contracts. uh, yeah, I mean, the conversation around transitioning away from coal is not really in place there, because it is transitioning towards coal at this moment.
Okay. Thank you for that, Shishti, for that very sobering last comment. Okay, so we're going to move to our next presentation, which is by Aditi Subramaniam and Niranjan Kumar on navigating just transitions in exhausted extractive industries, insights from the Kolar gold fields. And just to remind you both, it's 12 minutes, and we'll let you know on chat, uh, when we should be wrapping up.
Hello, my name is Aditi and this is Niranjan, and we are presenting our ongoing research, which is titled Navigating Just Transitions in Exhausted Extractive Industries, Insights from the Kolar Gold Fields. So just to start off, before we get into our research project itself, to give an overview of Kolar Goldfields. Kolar Goldfields is located in the Kolar district of Karnataka. It is in the southeast part of the state and it borders Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. It is one of the oldest and deepest gold mines in the world. And the trajectory of development of KGF is very interesting, all the way from its conception in the 1800s to its eventual closure in 2001. And this research essentially aims to analyze the periods in which development at this space peaked to what is now referred to as a ghost town of a space in some sense. And so we talk about extractive industries and just transitions throughout this research. So to just kind of give it a definition, extractivism refers to the large-scale removal of natural resources with minimal or no processing for the purpose of export. And extractivism itself is integral to the capitalist mode of production and has always been ever since its inception, and that it is central to the understanding of today's ecological crisis that we see. Just transitions, conventional definition simply refers to the shifting to a low carbon economy while ensuring that no individuals, communities are left behind or are disproportionately impacted by the change. Now we kind of contextualize just transitions in that we understand that a demand for just transitions came from a labor union struggle from a first world country where essentially the demand was for a kind of job security. And to understand that in the context of India, whose labor force has been largely characterized and defined as being unorganized, where job insecurity and volatility are kind of its foundational features, we kind of critique and engage with the definition of just transitions accordingly, although we will elaborate more on this in the upcoming slides. Yeah, so kind of a focus aim of this research. So why KGF? So KGF is an interesting field for many reasons. It is similar to other extractive industries in some sense, but also has its own unique features, which makes it an interesting study. For instance, the fact that it is located in a third world country and the fact that it is an exhausted extractive industry can give it, I mean, the implications of this research can kind of give us insights into the development trajectory or the possible development trajectory of other extractive industries. And hence, this is an interesting field site as such. And we kind of aim to, in this research, redefine and rethink the definition of just transitions. And we aim to critically engage with the limitations and scope of development under capitalism. And we do this by kind of dissecting the trajectory of development into different phases. One is like during the British colonial rule, then we look at the Nehruvian era of nationalist planning, all the way to the to the 1990s and to current present day aspirations and kind of expectations of development from the space. Now Niranjan will kind of take us through the timeline of KGF.
Okay, so this is basically a rough timeline of how events started. So in 1802 is the first, after the defeat of Tipu Sultan's, when there is an examination of whether you could mine in Kolar or not. It was done by Lieutenant Warren. He was a British geologist. But the first major mining operation started under Michael Fitzgerald Lowell. If you're in Bangalore, Lowell Road is named after him. But he's the one who bought the mining rights from the British government in Mysore. And then he started mining for a few years, but he didn't have enough capital to expand it to the scale it required. So he sold his rights to Taylor and Sons, who were a British mining company, which had many mines across the British Empire, and they were the ones who actually conducted the mines from 1880 onwards. They are the ones who are responsible for expanding the mines massively. So Kolar itself is something called a deep shaft mine. So which means it has to go very deep. You have to burrow deep underground to do it. It goes to around 10,000 feet, and that is very important. So, and for doing this kind of mining, one very important two things you need is water and electricity. And so, to provide electricity for it, the Shivanasamudra hydroelectric plant was kind of commissioned and built. And so, with that, Kolar became one of the first electrified towns in India in 1902. And that with this electricity and this thing, Kolar ran at full steam ahead. And at its peak, around 30,000 workers were mining in Kolar with their families. And so that's how Kolar functioned during the British Raj period. And then by 1947, after independence of India, the management was transferred to Karnataka government. And then in 1956, it was nationalized by the Indian government to Bharat Gold Mines Limited, under Bharat Gold Mines Limited. And in 2001, it was finally shut. Right now, they are trying to find solutions for what to do with Kolar, which includes like auctioning mining rights and stuff. But let's go forward and I'll explain a bit more in detail. So first, let's examine the British Raj itself. So during the British Raj, Kolar actually provides a very interesting example because initially, if you look at it, it was seen as a opportunity for a better working environment for especially many marginalized folk. Most of the laborers came from neighboring states because Kolar is located in like a very central location in terms of between Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. So a lot of the laborers who came and worked in Kolar actually did come from Tamil Nadu and Andhra, especially Dalit laborers, because for them it kind of was, in many cases, was an improvement because they got a daily wage from the actual mines itself. With majority of these miners, many of these miners sometimes being also from because due to their caste backgrounds, they were forced into bonded labor, and so it was kind of an escape for them and much more reasonable work. Laborers in KGF were primarily almost executives, masons, and coolies in some ways. These executives are usually British on Cornish men who are basically handling all the mining operations. These Cornish men were mining experts called by Taylor and Sons. They were considered the best miners in the world, and they were the ones who would actually instruct on how the projects function. Coolies were the actual miners themselves. They were all these marginalized workers I described earlier, and masons were basically the people who would set quotas and have to collect them and do all the menial tasks of menial logistical tasks for the executives. So basically, these kind of the working conditions kind of also differ due by type of employment kind of. Usually these coolies and masons lived in things called coolie towns. These coolie towns are basically shanty towns with little water, very little space, no schooling, no hospitals, no nothing. Whereas the British executives and British and Anglo-Indian executives lived in a place called Little England. They basically had large bungalows with open spaces, and they basically made a town which was so fancy they called it Little England. It had electricity, running water in very early into the Indian state. So, and the first hospital in the area was built in Little England. But the miners, it took very long for the miners to actually ever get access to it. And we even read parts where it said that the mining officials would rather just send the miners back to their villages than actually send them to the hospital in Kolar if they were injured during the mine. So that's kind of how the British functioned. Most of the gold during this period was actually just taken by the British, with some amounts going to the Mysore Princely state for example, like the KSR dam project and stuff during the 1930s. The most of the gold was taken by the British, especially to build their reserves. Also during this is also during when the World Wars happened. So during that time, they increased massively, ramped up how much gold was being mined because they wanted to mine as much as possible as quickly as possible because wars are very expensive, so they could buy resources and stuff for the wars and to kind of defend themselves and also to build up their gold reserves because of currency. Then comes post-independence. So after independence, for the short period, it's under Karnataka government, but in 1956, basically the Indian government nationalizes the mine under BGML, Bharat Gold Mines Limited. So this period now onwards kind of sees a different as like all case of nationalization does, where nationalization is not a purely profit-driven motive. It doesn't have a purely profit-driven motive. So usually workers have a bit more freedom and kind of a bit more security in some ways. So this is also kind of a period where, like after 1956 and the 1960s, is kind of also the period where you start seeing unions forming in KGF, and and you see a lot more job security, slight increase in wages. But one fundamental change that did not take place in the 1950s and 60s was the fact that the laborers tended the caste ladder of this was very much defined. Like the higher executives were usually upper caste Hindus, whereas the laborers were Dalit and other marginalized folk. So, but in the 1970s,
so you have 2 minutes left. So maybe we can give you a few extra minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So to speed it up a bit quickly, sorry, where's yeah, so 1960s, whereas like the caste thing, but by 1970s when the finance ministry took over, it became a bit more equalized in terms of caste thing. By the 20th century, the cost production increased too much, so they couldn't extract massive gold. And by 1990s, it was actually operating at a loss. So the government itself at this point started questioning whether they should run this mine or not. But there was resistance from workers, and they were protesting to make sure the mines remains open, and massive layoffs were happening. So during this period, they started protesting all this. But in 2001, without any major like information from the government, they shut down the mines unilaterally. The response at the time was protest, but it went on deaf ears, and it affected workers very adversely because their income sources shut down. They did not have any source of suddenly all the illness and stuff they could pay for with the money they were getting from the mines is no more there. So all the diseases and stuff that they were affected by started being much more serious. And in this, you can also see one. And now finally, when you come there, now Kolar is now in almost a dilapidated place. From being the first town to ever get electricity, now it doesn't have consistent electricity connection or water supply, especially after shutting of the mine. And one thing that is clearly visible from all this is the fact that even throughout all these years, you have seen all these material and social changes, but one thing has remained consistent, that is capitalism. And that has been the one inherent character of this mine throughout its entire existence. So now currently the only solution for revival of KGF has been to auction off the rights of the mine or to find ways to extract gold from the residue from the mines. I think we continue from it.
Okay. So to kind of quickly summarize everything Niranjan kind of explained. So through this research, we essentially understand that the definition of just transitions that I explained earlier is, I mean, the focus is just on employment towards a non-carbon economy and to kind of do any kind of development in any society, but specifically a society like KGF, which, I mean, its entire development was keeping in mind the extractive society. A development took place only to facilitate the increase of extractions in KGF. So we're thinking of we think that there's a need for many transitions instead. There's a need to transition away from underpaid exploitative work. There's a need to overcome existing forms of marginalization in the process. Because in the end of the day, if the dynamics of employment do not fundamentally change, and only that the nature of work or the nature of the nature of the industry that they're in a part of changes, that doesn't change these underlying forms of discrimination, and that there's a need, and that the insight of KGF is that development in extractive industries is conditional, and it's also temporary. The example Niranjan gave on electricity, the fact that in 1902 KGF was one of the first few places in the country to get electricity, to now, right after the mine shut down in 2001, they now don't get frequent electricity or regular supply of water. So this itself is quite telling of the scope of development in an extractive industry in a capitalist society. And yeah, and just to kind of discuss our next steps, given that this is our ongoing research, we now wish to do a mapping of KGF at present, which is to kind of understand the current healthcare facilities, schooling facilities, and our interview is mainly, we aim to conduct interviews primarily to understand the aspirations of those living near the mine and their views on whether the mine should reopen or not, and as well as to understand if there's any generational difference between among themselves, to understand if the non-functioning of the mind has affected their decision to leave or aspiration to move away from KGF in a certain way. And I try to keep it as short as possible, but we can answer more things in the question and answer.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Okay, that was. Thank you for sharing your research, and I understand it's a research. It's in process, so I think you've done a lot of really interesting kind of a lot of work to situate the site that you're studying. I wanted to kind of come back to one of the initial and as the question and answer is open for the floor, but as people think of questions. Initially in your presentation, you said that coal gold mines help you think about different sites and different extractive industries, right? That this example is indicative of something else, which challenges the idea of just transitions. Can you help us just analytically understand what that is? Like, in summary, what are the 2 or 3 points that we can take away for what other kinds of extractive industries could be doing to this, to this question?
Right. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yeah. And if there are any other questions in the audience, you can just please put your hands up. We'll get the mics to you. Sorry, Aditi, please go on.
Yeah. So I think one of the main points in this is the fact that it's an exhausted extractive industry. I mean, when I say exhausted, I really mean that gold still exists in KGF, but the cost of extracting that gold is simply unprofitable. Hence, it is not done anymore. And given the current climate crisis and the very finite nature of nature and natural resources on one hand, and on the other hand you see the logic of capitalism itself, which requires you in some sense, and we see this historically, the extraction of resources to kind of facilitate production and things like that. I think to see what KGF is capable of can also tell us about what other societies that function within the logic of capitalism are capable of. The fact that even now the state is basically thinking of reopening the mines. They're thinking of doing a re-evaluation of whether it is unprofitable or not. And this is happening every once in a while, right? They're not able to think beyond the extractive industry for the imagination of the development of KGF, which I think is,
Okay.
yeah.
Got it. Thank you for that. Any questions from the audience here or online?
Hi, I have it's just a curious question.
Will you tell us your name
Yeah,
also?
my name is Shankar, and I'm an assistant professor at Christ University. It just in terms of defining capitalism, when you relate the coal gold fields, you gave a historical picture, and you told that it was always inherently capitalism that was always in function. But post 1947, or perhaps even much before that, wasn't it actually more of a feudalistic kind as compared to capitalism? So I'm primarily trying to look into the debate of the transition from feudalism to capitalism. So if you could relate that in the cola gold field, perhaps now it is more capitalist and earlier it was more of a feudalist kind of production.
Okay, we have one more question. Maybe we can just ask the gentleman here to say it and then they can respond together. Thank you so much for passing the mic. Sir, behind you.
My name is Manmohan, and this is as much in the nature of a comment as a question. I have someone working for me at home whose father was a miner at KGF. She has no memory of him. She's in her early 40s. He moved to Hyderabad because he was laid off at the time as a miner. So this began in the 80s and perhaps even before that. What's interesting is that if I were to guess at his age, he probably started working as a miner in the 60s or 70s, the late 60s or sometime in the 70s. So the comment that Aditi made about these resources being finite and being exhaustive or exhausting inherently is important, because if you don't recognize that and see what can be done for those people who are working there in alternative positions or places, you're just going to run into a blank wall. To add to that, in the early 1990s, PUCL Karnataka was running an agitation to have the mines back to full capacity. When I tried to point out to them that the mines were no longer economically viable, that's something that had never struck them. I'm surprised that people who want to attempt to help don't want to recognize that there are inherent problems with a particular situation.
Okay. Aditi and Niranjan, would you like to respond to those two?
So the first question that was asked about feudalism in that whether is it not feudalist production, but it really is not. It's still capitalist production towards this thing, because you see it's the ones running the mine and profiting directly from the mine is actually the Taylor and Sons Mining Corporation. Like it's still functional today, by the way. The Taylor and Sons Mining Corporation. They are the ones running it. It's how it functions, how its dynamics are, how it's structured. Everything about it is capitalism. It's about endless accumulation of capital for the more. They just keep producing. And the thing is, one of the more beneficiaries of it also turned out to be the British state. So I don't explicitly agree with the idea that it's suddenly feudal because, of course, the royal monarch of Britain at the time had more power. But it is still very much inherently very capitalistic. And thank you for the comment. I thought it was very interesting.
Just wanted to add one small thing to the comment. The fact, I mean, what you were talking about, people unable to imagine the fact that nature and natural resources is finite. I mean, it seems naive, but at the same time, it is also so fundamental to the idea of green growth also, right? In a sense where you kind of think of technology as a means to endlessly extract something that we know is scientifically finite. So I do think there's a need for us to think about this. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Aditi Niranjan. We'll move on to the next presentation, which is by Gitanjali and sorry, there were different names written on the Gitanjali and Chinmay. Chinmay? Okay. On waste workers in contemporary Bangalore.
Hello everyone. So we are going to present our abstract title Waste Workers, Changing Labor Dynamics in Informal Waste Sector and Implications for Just Transition. So we are part of the research team at Hasiru Dala and writing from the practice based on the decade-long engagement that Hasiru Dala had with waste pickers and informal waste workers in Bangalore city especially and overall in Karnataka. So To give you the context, workers in the waste economy earn their livelihood by recovering, processing, and selling valuable waste, thereby contributing to circular economy. Today, waste economy has shifted from subsistence activity to a fragmented market influenced by multiple emerging private actors, municipal policies and bodies, and global recycling plus reuse demand. In this context, the term waste picker or waste worker has expanded with sector's evolution and now includes different categories of workers in the recycling value chain. Just for instance, this is from our study and Hasiru Dala's experience. This working diagram showcasing workers in Bangalore's informal waste sectors based on the nature of their work. As you can see, the solid waste recycling sector includes workers engaged in collecting and sorting waste, such as waste pickers, sorters, free roaming waste pickers, drivers, helpers, as well as those higher up the value chain, managing large-scale waste aggregation and resale, who employ others for collection and sorting tasks. The presence of these different workers represent a shift from informal, autonomous waste picking to structured roles within semi-formal or professionalized waste management system, operating with different degrees of informality in their working conditions. So in this context, what is just transition for waste pickers? The concept of just transitions, as explained in previous presentation, also ensures that no one is left behind as economies and markets shift towards greener practices. It recognizes the disproportionate impact plastic pollution and climate crisis have on socio-economically marginalized communities and workers who are at the risk of displacement from circular economy policies. For waste pickers, the just transition means creating decent work opportunities, recognizing their contribution, and integrating them for changing waste and recycling management system. So our paper presents insights from ongoing larger study by Hasiru Dala. There are different studies, aspirational studies, living income studies. Based on that, this study looks at the occupational mobility of waste workers, both within and beyond the waste sector, and uncovers key factors that prompt their attrition and re-entry. This work draws on practice-based insights from Hasiru Dala's long-term engagement with waste pickers in Bangalore. It investigates the social, economic, and political impacts of waste work, focusing on the core questions as why do waste workers enter the sector, mostly to understand the motivations and influencing factors. How do they move or progress within the waste sector, or what are the factors, actors, or instruments lead them to leave or return to waste work. So ultimately, these insights will help us shaping the policies, programs, and support systems that acknowledge the realities of waste pickers and other waste workers. With this, I would like Geetanjali to take over.
Okay, yeah. So the previous slide was basically an overview of the initiatives that are taken place at the Bangalore level when it comes to issuing occupational identity cards for waste pickers, as well as recognizing their importance and giving them ownership and management of dry waste collection centers at the ward level. For our methodology, we have mostly used an exploratory design approach with purposive sampling across different worker groups, where we have currently interviewed around 24 waste workers, along with stakeholder interviews with dry waste collection operators, Hasiru Dala's staff, as well as representatives from the Union of Waste Pickers in Karnataka. It is important to note that this is not a representative sample at this stage of our research. However, they offer valuable preliminary insights that can guide our research forward. So when it comes to changing labor dynamics in Bangalore's waste sector, the first and foremost question is, who are waste workers in Bangalore? So our insights highlight that waste work in Bangalore represents the intersection of economic precarity, social identity encapsulating gender, caste, and migration dynamics that are impacting the labor market in waste sector. We have broadly categorized these workers into two categories based on their nature of engagement with waste work, into regional and migrant waste workers. So first, our regional waste workers. In Bangalore, autonomous free-roaming waste picking has predominantly been done by women from the marginalized scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities. Many inherit this work generationally due to caste-based occupational inheritance and have struggled to move out of the sector. For these women, waste picking often supplements household income. We refer to these waste workers as regional waste workers because historically these communities have migrated from neighboring regional states of Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and parts of northern Karnataka and have worked in the waste sector for generations. It is important to note that their deep association with waste work, especially generational engagement, distinguishes them from migrant waste workers. Migrant workers, in this case, represents a newer demographic entering the waste sector in Bangalore. These migrant workers are predominantly single men or young couples belonging to the Muslim community migrating from states like Assam and West Bengal in search of livelihood. Most of these migrants are first-generation workers to ever engage or enter in waste work. So why are we talking about these two groups? Our study shows that there is a differential labor participation by migrant and regional workers in the waste sector of Bangalore. While both groups face economic precarity and systemic exclusion to varying degrees, they share distinct relationships to waste work that influence their participation in the sector and highlight how the waste sector is changing as well as impacting the labor dynamics within it. We will be talking about this differential labor participation by talking about the following three things. One is the difference in their working conditions and female labor force participation. Second is their perception and relationships to waste work. And third is the differential vulnerabilities they experience while engaging in waste work today. So when it comes to their working conditions, migrant workers are mostly men who are hired and employed by actors engaged in aggregation and resale of waste, such as scrap dealers. They engage in waste collection via vehicles like tricycles and trucks, which are provided to them by their employers, which enables them to cover more ground and collect more quantities of waste. They work under semi-formal conditions with payment based on set working hours by the employer. Women migrant in some cases work as sorters in these collection centers. When it comes to regional workers, women, especially older generations, have seen little to no occupational mobility in their years of engagement with waste work. They are primarily autonomous waste pickers who collect waste on foot from streets and shops and earn based on the quantity of waste collected. They work on their own flexible times during early morning hours, but now face reduced access to waste due to new competitors, including private players, dry waste collection trucks, nighttime waste collection by migrants, under recent changes that are taking place in the city's solid waste management system. As the waste sector has evolved in the city, some of the younger generation or children of older waste pickers have continued to engage work due to unequal access to education and lack of alternative work opportunities. These younger generations display a degree of intergenerational mobility within the changing waste sector, where we see some of the younger women being employed as municipal sweepers or parakarmikas, and men who are seen engaging in driving and helping work at waste collection centers. Along with their working conditions, migrants and regional waste workers share differential relationship and perception to waste work at large. For migrant workers, they enter the waste sector primarily because they find working in the waste sector more lucrative and view waste collection and sorting less physically strenuous than other labor opportunities such as construction work. Majority of them get to know about the scope of the work in the sector due to existing social networks in the city. Employers, in this case, thekedars or operators, prefer hiring migrant workers over their local counterparts due to their willingness to work with, quote, all kinds of waste, and also use their professional networks to pull workers to work in their centers. Migrants have a supplementary and a temporary engagement with waste work and do not want to work in it for long and plan to exit from the sector. Regional workers, on the other hand, continue to assert and associate waste work as our work. They want to work in the waste sector but at higher positions. A lot of regional workers reject job opportunities to work as sorters or helpers in the emerging waste collection centers because they do not want to be associated with societal stigma and discrimination that is attached to waste work and their community, and are not ready to work with all kinds of waste that comes to these centers. Those regional workers who are willing to work in these centers face barriers to work due to far proximity of these centers from their homes, as well as household responsibilities and lack of adjustment with set working hours. Lastly, both groups experience differential vulnerabilities while participating in the sector today. Migrant workers lack access to social security, housing due to their transient status. Even though they form a key demographic workforce today in the waste sector, they are unable to access organized benefits from union membership due to lack of domicile proof. In addition, they depend heavily on employers, thekedars, and landowners for livelihood, as well as residents in the city, which increases their risk of exploitation. Regional workers are currently struggling to maintain sustainable income with declining access to waste due to competition in the waste collection market and poor source segregation. Overall, they continue to face barriers to entering higher positions in the waste sector due to systemic and economic challenges, such as lack of access to skill development, investment capacity, inconsistent policy implementation, and lack of social security. To conclude, Chinmay.
Yeah. So basically, our study is trying to ask this question that amid these changing labor dynamics, how we can envision a just transition that acknowledges and integrates these distinct realities unfolding on the ground, and how we can ensure the inclusion of different waste pickers, diverse experiences, and offering pathways both within and beyond the waste sector. So we hope this preliminary findings spark a discussion on how to create a just and equitable transition for all waste workers. And as a researchers and practitioners, we come here not to just highlight our findings, but to collaboratively explore different pathways for sustainable change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both for that presentation. Any questions from? Okay, questions have come. Anybody else? We can get the mic to you as Neeti asked. Okay.
Thanks for the presentation, Chinmay and Geetanjali. I'm Neeti. I teach and research in the field of urban employment and informality, and I work here at IIHS. Since we have been talking a lot about waste work and working a lot together around this theme, right? So I find it is quite, it's more than a question. I find it is quite curious to see that category of workers where we consider them as informal workers, but within the informal category itself, we couldn't see any bridge within these two categories, that is regional and migrant workers, even though both of them face more or less similar insecurities and more or less similar challenges. So my concern or my question here is that, do you think that formation of union TSS whether it has any role, or can TSS can try to bring these two categories of workers together to face some of these challenges which are happening in the waste dynamics? How do you look at it?
We'll just take one
okay.
more question. So there's a question already.
I had exactly the same question. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
My question is, you said that traditionally it was women who were doing this, this kind of work, and then now you also have male migrants coming into it. I was curious, generally women work at the lowest rung in terms of both wages and working conditions and all of that. With the entry of male workers, has there been any change in this employment relationship between the contractor and the worker? I understand they're migrants, so they're also perhaps as badly placed as the women, but just sort of curious what those dynamics look like now that it's shifted from women workers to male workers. We rarely see that change.
Okay.
Maybe
So
they can answer these two questions and then you can ask.
okay. Can I take, I will answer, and if you have few more, you can join in. Just to go with the first question, on the front of bridging between these two, so it is kind of a unique case study for Bangalore itself, because Bangalore waste management system is more inclusive than, and it has more better conditions than other cities or regions compared to maybe Delhi or that maybe other cities as well, where the inclusion of waste picker has also happened at the municipal level. So when we talk about the strengthening of TSS, so right now we are trying to, like from TSS point of view also, I can say that there is a step towards bridging that gap, but the problem of their transient nature, because they come here, they work here for a certain period and go back to their places, hometowns, especially in Assam and West Bengal in the farming season. So that migratory nature, because of which the membership is not happening. And at the same time, there is a language barrier. Language barrier in terms of Hindi also, speaking with them in Hindi also becomes a very challenging. So because of that, that bridges, there are challenges to bridge that gap, but there are a lot of efforts being taken from the union, especially because of the union, and with other interventions and programs like capacity building and skill development, we are trying to bridge that gap. And to answer the question, I wouldn't say that there is a shift from female waste pickers to male waste pickers. It's just that the difference that we have, like two categories that we have talked about, there is more migration happening right now. So the male counterparts from the Assam and West Bengal are entering into waste picking sector, but there are female waste pickers as well. So there is no shift, but there are different experiences, and those basic different different experiences itself made us to categorize them in these two categories, and try to be as inclusive as possible with all the different kind of waste pickers coming into the sector. Yeah. So
I actually have a question, and then there's another question
Yeah.
for the audience, which is that just reflecting, because you are practitioners, right? You're doing this research for an organization that is making a change in the sector. And we also know that migration networks work on how information flows between different networks, right? So, what do you think the role of Hasiru Dala is in creating this kind of migration effect? Is there a role? Is it because the sector has gotten better, there is a little bit more dignified working conditions, that this is seen as like a viable short-term adaptation to whatever issues are happening in those home economies? Just a wider question, because I was thinking about the diagram you showed initially. That's a fairly formalized structure, right, for a very precarious economy. So just a reflective note. And there's a second question. Maybe we can ask that and then you can respond.
So thanks a lot for the presentation. So in terms of transitions or employment transitions of waste pickers, I was curious to know whether these were like full-time working in waste picking, or they were also having part-time other jobs. And this comes from the context of some of the work that I have done in Mumbai with waste pickers, where they also sort of moving out of the sector that you mentioned. They were also like working in the gig economy as say delivery partners for Swiggy and things like that, to sort of challenge the association with the pollution which was attributed to their waste work. So I was interested in knowing whether you found something similar in Bangalore as well. Thanks.
okay, so I'll go first there and then I will come here. So, especially in Mumbai, because there are good unions working with to organize waste pickers, but the response from the urban local bodies and the inclusion is not that great. So the dignity part of it, which we have achieved for some level over here in Bangalore, is not there in Mumbai. So because of that, you can see there are alternate jobs that waste pickers are also doing over there, and they want to get out of it. The experience in Bangalore with our, not this study, but the aspirational study also, we have seen that not everybody wants to leave the waste sector. Especially because the kind of opportunities that are coming in with the recycling markets, with the reuse discourse, and the inclusion of waste picker in just transition discourse or INC 5 discourse, and they are more exposed to that at Bangalore level due to the TSS organizing work and the capacity building work. So they are more, they want, most of them want to be in waste sector, but not at the collection level, but at the recycling aggregation level to go up on the higher scales. So that kind of aspiration, there are few people who do want to get out of this. There are few migrants, especially we have seen, whose children are entering into gig platform worker. But they see that the kind of efforts that they have to put over there, the kind of working hours they have to put, the inflexibility of other informal sector, so that's why they come back to the waste sector again. So the flexibility, the informality, the flexibility, and the opportunities that waste sector is giving, because of which we have seen a lot of re-entries also. But that is again a question for the as the research develops, we will get more answers to that. These are just our observations right now. And sorry, I forgot your questions. Can you?
That even what you're saying, right? The fact that you're seeing a lot of re-entry, people staying in the market, because there's an effect that Hasiru Dala has had on this city's waste economy.
Yeah.
A very strong effect to formalize, to have some more dignified conditions for business.
So yeah. So sorry,
what is the impact of that on this new migration that you're seeing into the city?
So I won't say that it is Hasiru Dala's direct impact. Because migration is happening over here. It's more because of the information that is getting transferred to Assam and West Bengal workers to come here, and we have seen that most of them were working in Delhi or in the northern parts before, but because of the different challenges, especially the climate challenges, that pollution and the life quality and all these things, they think. Because of that, they are coming to Bangalore. They feel that Bangalore is more comfortable. Bangalore has better weather.
My
so
point
yeah.
is to reflect on that. Actually, I think Hasiru Dala seems to have a very important impact in the sector. So just to reflect on that, I know we're also running out of time. I'm getting lots of isharas to stop. But thank you so much for that. We'll just move on to the next presentation, which is Ian Cook, who's sitting next to me, who will be talking to us about auto rickshaw drivers and urban change in smaller Indian cities. Very excited to hear this from my own interest in transport workers around the country.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks. Yeah, it's very nice to be back here at IIHS after a long time. So I want to think through urban change, specifically. I want to think through urban change from the street up, specifically from a particular rickshaw stand in Bengaluru. For those who are not local, or those online who are not local, Bengaluru is a city here in Karnataka on the coast, just north of Kerala. And then specifically, I'm going to talk about a rickshaw stand called Morgan's Gate. And I'm a social anthropologist, and we like to answer big questions in small places. And I hope the specificity of looking just at one particular stand and this area won't put people off who are used to working with bigger and broader ideas of data. And I hopefully have some things to say about the cities and the, I say change and not transformation, that are taking place. Okay, where's the thingy-mabob? Yeah, so I've been doing fieldwork there since 2011, which I know is a long time to research the same place. It's part of a wider project on urban change in Mangalore. I've done research amongst auto rickshaw drivers, which I'll talk a little bit about now, but also vendors, so street hawkers, and also housing and land brokers. But specifically, here's a list of all the things I did that sort of inform the research that I'll be talking about now. And maybe I'll just tell you a few little things things about Mangalore which are pertinent to this story. The first thing to know when you're thinking about transport is Bengaluru is very hilly, which makes a big difference in terms of both the amount of fuel you use, but also how you get around. It's a port city. It's been a port city for forever, ever since it's been known on any sort of map. And it also has now an all-weather port, which was built in the 1970s. It's an education hub, it's a petrochemical industrial hub, and it has designs on also being an IT hub as well, sort of a second city here in Karnataka to Bangalore. In terms of auto rickshaw drivers, there's about 9,000 of them with permits in the city. There's no entry of Uber or Ola or any of these digital apps in the city at the moment. And I would say like 95 or even more percent of the time, rickshaw drivers always put on their meter. You don't need to negotiate with them, which makes it very different from Bangalore. And makes me wish I was back in Mangalore. So I spent a lot of time sitting with auto rickshaw drivers and also interviewing them and their families. And I got very interested in thinking about waiting, waiting as something which is active and not passive. I started to think through what waiting meant to the auto rickshaw drivers and also how and what it meant maybe more broadly to the city as well. So I make this distinction, this three-way distinction between different forms of waiting, waiting on, waiting with, and waiting for. So in terms of waiting on, which maybe sounds a bit weird, but actually that's probably how most of us think of waiting when we think of waiters. Waiters, they wait on us when we're waiting in a restaurant or in a cafe, and it's basically to serve the people who they are waiting on. And of course, there are distinct rules governing this in a rickshaw stand. These are enforced by the rickshaw drivers themselves, you know, to make sure that, you know, people don't queue jump in terms of if there's a more profitable ride to be had. But I want to emphasize this waiting on because a lot of rickshaw drivers spend a lot of their time actually waiting. And this is a form of labor, even if they're not earning at that actual moment. And these are the sort of the hidden temporalities or hidden rhythms of labor that very often as consumers or as commuters, we don't think about the amount of time people have to wait. Think especially at night, if we arrive off a night bus from visiting our family or coming home from the pub, then maybe, you know, that somebody's been waiting there for a long time to allow you the convenience of going home. I would also then maybe just quickly move on to the waiting with, because of course waiting is not just an individual autonomous activity, it's a very social activity. There's lots of waiting when rickshaw drivers are waiting. Primarily they're waiting with other rickshaw drivers, but not only. Morgan's Gate stand where I did the ethnographic research, there was lots of local men, it's a completely male space, who would also wait around there as well, which actually made it quite easy for me just to be there as an anthropologist and sit around and not be a driver myself. So what happens when people wait with? Of course, there are trade unions. I don't have time to talk about the role of trade unions now, but also on the actual stands themselves, lots of informal and sometimes more formal types of organization emerge. And this is really important when it comes to times of crises. So for example, if an auto rickshaw driver is sick or has an accident, then the rickshaw drivers will club together, gather some money and give it to the family, to the wife or the mother or so on, to basically pay for the household expenses until the rickshaw driver can work again. It's also really interesting that when waiting is happening, and I mentioned it specifically for Mangalore, because Bengaluru has a reputation from outside of having lots of communal violence, but the waiting that took place at Morgan's Gate and in other stands definitely crossed community, so religious community, and also caste boundaries quite often in terms of both this sort of solidarity that I spoke about then, and also in terms of the sociality that came as well. So people would go to the wine shop, so the pub together. People would also go on trips together and attend each other's functions, weddings, and so on. This isn't to say this is like some wonderful space of communal harmony. Of course it's not, but I thought it's nevertheless worth pointing out. And also when people are waiting and they're waiting with, of course they're talking, because people talk a lot. And when they're talking, they observe the city changing around them. And rickshaw drivers could also, especially came out during the interviews, could be quite sharp observers of the city changing. So I'll talk about in a minute, there was a sort of a business outsourcing center opened up right next to Morgan's Gate, and they would comment upon the fashion choices of the middle class IT guys and what they would wear and what that projected about themselves after they took them home, and also saw the actual houses that they lived in and the disconnect that was there. And finally, waiting for, and maybe this is also what we think about when we're waiting, because often we are waiting for something good or something bad, and this is also a different form of waiting. So when I was first started doing the research in 2011, 12, 13, at this time, there was a lot of expectancy in Bengaluru that the city was changing for the better, like in terms of development. People would point out all the time, look at these great big shopping malls that are coming up in the city. Look at these great big high-rises. Even if the rickshaw drivers themselves never went to the shopping malls and didn't live in these high-rises, nevertheless, they saw this as a form of great development which was happening. Now people are much more cynical and upset about it, because Bengaluru is unfortunately copying many of the issues that Bangalore has in terms of traffic congestion, in terms of infrastructural collapse, and so on. 5 minutes left, oh no. And so I will, and the other thing people are waiting often for, and maybe lots of us are waiting for this, is retirement. And so how an auto rickshaw driver would strategize for retirement was generally the case was you started off renting an auto rickshaw. Now you can rent one for the day for around 150 rupees to work. You earn about 1,500 a day at the moment in Mangalore. But if you could buy yourself a permit to use an auto rickshaw driver now costs about 2 lakh, so 200,000 rupees. And you bought the auto rickshaw yourself, and then you would use that during your life while paying off the loan for that. Then when it came to retirement, you would sell that, and that would be your nest egg from which to retire. This is being disrupted by the arrival of electric vehicles in the city, because electric autos don't need permits. This is a central government decision, and so things are changing quite quickly there. So some auto rickshaw drivers are selling these permits, which they sell on the black market for 200,000, to buy an electric vehicle instead. But this is changing how people strategize. And the final thing to mention here about waiting for is that people are also waiting for change around Morgan's Gate, because Morgan's Gate is changing quite a bit. So now I'm going to tell you a very specific story about Morgan's Gate, just a few hundred years in 2 minutes, and then I'll try to go back to this freeway distinction between waiting on, with, and for, to see if I can tell us something more broadly. Okay, so I promised myself I wouldn't speak so fast, so I'll try to slow down. So a story from Morgan's Gate. So you might ask, who are the Morgans? So the Morgans were British coffee traders. They came from Jamaica. Oh, well, they first were in Jamaica, then they came to Mangalore. Mangalore was an important place for the trading of coffee. And they set themselves up at the southern edge of the city in Jepu, which is now the wider area, and now it's part of the city along the river. Right. At the same time, the Basel Mission were very active. This is in the 1800s, after the British defeat of Tipu Sultan, and they started converting people mainly from the Bilaver caste or jati, who were tori tapping or hunting caste, and they started to set up tile factories to provide employment for people from who have been converted to Protestantism. The Morgans also set up tile works at the same time as well, and Mangalore tiles could be seen all over Mangalore, and actually much more broadly and around the world. These sort of orange-coloured tiles made from the mud of the river there in Mangalore. During the First World War, the British seized the Basel Mission property. Later, this was Indianized, and some of the land actually was brought up by a company owned by Café Coffee Day, the popular coffee chain, which has run into financial trouble. The founder of Café Coffee Day studied in Mangalore. He was the son of the former chief minister, or son-in-law rather, of the former chief minister. And he also unfortunately died by suicide in Mangalore a few years ago as well, just next to by Morgan's Gate. Another super interesting thing here is that one of the auto drivers, so let's bring it back to the auto drivers, had land sold to this company, at the time to Café Coffee Day's subsidiary, and they only set up this outsourcing center there, which is why you got all these like young middle class guys going around there. He really didn't want it. He was much more in favor of just staying there, but his older brothers overruled him, and he now they all live outside the city. They have some land and they have some sort of money, and right next to that land, some other land was brought up by a Swiss, British, Indian developer. He's built a high-rise property there called the Aquamarine. I was just there in December listening to Christmas carols being sung. It looks out over the city. It's right next to Mangalore Club, this old club which now is full of how to put it politely, rich Indians who really like English people and Englishness, and makes me feel uncomfortable. And he was very clever, this developer, because he knew that there was a ring road development coming up. There's been speculation about a ring road for a long time in Mangalore that would try and somehow ape Marine Drive in Mumbai. It didn't happen for a long time, but now under the Smart City project, its program, it seems that this will start to take place. So this is land which is mostly owned by the port, and it's going to create a ring road pedestrian way, and let's see if it actually happens along the riverfront in Mangalore. Okay, so to conclude, what can we learn at all by scaling up a little bit and thinking through this waiting on, waiting for, and waiting with in terms of the stories that I've sort of touched on in Morgan's Gate? So I would say, and you know, this evening there's going to be a really interesting talk about a book, and they're going to make a talk about urban dispositions, which I've read, but it's really interesting, this part in it where the authors make an argument where they say we should think both operationally, analytically, and also normatively. Am I right? Okay, and I'll try and do that a little bit here as well, because I think it's really interesting to think through these things together. So in terms of waiting on, currently at the moment, Mangalore is making a city where those who wait on people, those who serve the needs of the people who move around a city, is being done in a way that makes it very, very difficult for them. The Smart City program has demolished more than half of the stands in the city because they're widening roads. So now this picture you see in the middle where you have a tree and a stall, that's from the past. Now it's just been completely demolished and you have a wider road. So rickshaw drivers don't now have anywhere to wait. They just wait inside the rickshaw themselves. That's a very micro example of how you stop people waiting together, waiting with, and stop these important forms of solidarity and sociality and so on. Secondly, when it comes to waiting for, you have to have knowledge of what you're waiting for. So the developers know there's a ring road coming. So when they come in and they buy the land from the rickshaw driver's family, they can do that in knowledge that they can speculate, because that land is going to be worth a lot 5 years down the line when the ring road comes. But you don't know that if you're a rickshaw driver at a stand. You only know that if you go to Mangalore Club and share yourself a beer with the people who also work in the city government as well. And so finally, thinking a bit about how we can do things better, I think we should be thinking about ways in which we can build cities where there's more spaces for people to wait with one another, right? Those spaces where we wait with people, slightly forced, where we're forced to hang around with people, talk to people, interact with people who are not maybe from the same community, same political background, etc., and so on. Sorry for going over time, and thank you.
You've just like totally raised our energies also. So I'm loving this energy you've left us with. Any questions that are coming out from? Can you wait for the mic to come to you 1 second? This is the effect, Ian, that you've had on.
Hello, this is Vijay. I'm a research scholar from IIT Tirupati. I'm working on urban transportation. So I have two interconnected questions. Last month I have been to Chikmagaluru. I think you might know. This is near to Mangaluru. There I saw something different kind of auto stand structure from my place or Andhra Pradesh. See, there is like a waiting queue for autos that is structured, and the infrastructure also like one by one auto should be there. Maybe it's a ordinance of the trade unions. After one auto, the next auto should pick up the customer. Without the first auto being moved, the second, third, and fourth auto rickshaw man has no option to take the customer. On the other hand, we have decentralization in this waiting, like we have Rapido and Uber in other cities and tier 2 cities. What kind of contradiction this is, and what do you think this
Okay.
is?
Maybe there was another question at the back. Okay, cool. Go ahead, Niti. You can go ahead.
No, I was just wondering, the flow at which you were saying on for with, I was a bit, I find it as a bit inconvenient, not very comfortable. So is it, that is the flow in the sense, always do you argue that from on to for, then to with, or can you see any form of movement within, that is, it can start with and then go to for or on, because that's what I can see my work with, especially another category of informal workers, street-based sex worker, they're also waiting for all this, So can we just have a little bit more on for with?
Okay. There's also, can we get the mic to Sahil? Gautam, maybe you can ask and.
Yeah, I'll ask very briefly until then. Thanks so much for that, Ian. Just wanted to hear more on this idea of waiting with as a propositive imagination. And I'm just struck by the idea of usually that imagination on interaction with others that are not like you is a social call, but you're asking for a spatial call. And I just wanted you to think a little bit more about what it means for taking the idea of a social solidarity, but insisting that it is a spatial practice, right? And what does that mean in terms of deploying it?
Can we take one more question, Ian? Or would you like to? Yeah, Sahil?
Yeah, thank you. That was fascinating. Um, Pun intended. Your emphasis on waiting here. I'm just wondering, can we contrast this waiting on with the waiting for speculative development, which itself entails another form of waiting for the road to happen, waiting for the riverfront to happen? And so, how do you then see the contrast there between these different actors who are all waiting for an urban future where some will find space and others will not? So there's what I'm trying to say is that there's waiting of different kinds at the same time, and that waiting for has different valences, which might be interesting to look at this point. Thank you.
Okay, just a very, very quick question. Ian, thanks for that. Just I'm wondering because like in the time period that you've been studying this, there's also been, COVID and this idea of change, and I'm sure that it has kind of changed their own inner landscape of what they are waiting for. Like you spoke about that there's cynicism now, that there was excitement and that there's cynicism. And so I'm also sort of wanting to know a little bit more about this, that this on, for, and with, how that's sort of shifted with these kinds of changes where it's not sort of some linear growth in one way. There are these stops, these gaps, these sort of take backs that have happened. And also just, I realize there's a spatial argument you're making here, but there is also a certain kind of a temporality to the sociality of these different waiting, these things that you're talking about. So asking a little bit more of, like what is that analytical piece there in terms of the space or this rhythm that is associated with these three things which are very different.
I'm going to use my place as moderator to ask part B to that question. Sorry, and you have many to answer in one go.
Well, answer the ones I don't
like. Yeah. No, there's a lot written about transport workers and the relationship of time, right? I'm thinking of Sarah Sharma's work in the meantime. And a lot of that has to do with thinking about modernity and how fast-paced life gets and what the transport worker then does to multiplex other people's times, right? And the kind of interdependence of that. But that's a story about modernity. And I wonder for you, what you've seen about waiting tells us about what's happening in the small city, right? You're also making a case about there's some things unique happening there that's not happening elsewhere. So what does that help us see? Is it another form of modernity? What are they not? Yeah. What role are they kind of playing? Thank you.
Thank you so much for all those wonderful questions. To the first one about rules of waiting, so this is strictly enforced. I didn't get to show the film because of time, but I have a film exactly about this, a short ethnographic film about how waiting takes place on the stand. There's a little stand there, well, not anymore because it's been demolished, but at the time, a little stand there with the rules, and it's basically a queue, and you have to follow the queue. And this is enforced by the auto rickshaw drivers themselves with support of the union, and you can't really break that. I have seen it broken at night because waiting at night switches the rules because there's so much profit to be made at waiting at night that if somebody at one of the places where people wait at night for the night buses, then when I was there doing fieldwork, some guy jumped the queue, got a customer and went, and everyone was very angry about that because it's basically, look, you could wait for 4 hours and you could just get a 35 rupee ride, or you could get like a 200 rupee ride, and you can't really know that, of course, until you get it, and that's how they enforce it at the stand. By and large, the place where this stand was, Morgan's Gate, it filled a gap in between two bus routes because it's close to the national highway. So a lot of the rides there were very short, and people expected that, which is great for doing field work because most of the guys who kept coming back with the same rickshaw drivers again and again. But other stands in the center of the city are much more mixed, and that's important because then you can't have these informal rules. You have to have the fixed rules there because then people have to know. So it's in Mangalore, it's similar to Chikmagalur that these rules are enforced and in place. But yeah, it's interesting for me that I don't see it elsewhere because for me that would make obvious sense at how the best way to organize something. Yeah. So what was the question? On, with, and for. So and also maybe I'll think about these other things about spatiality and temporalities and so on. So the sort of the analytical drive that started the whole project back in the day was actually not thinking about space, but rather thinking about rhythm. At the time, I used to like a lot thinking with Henri Lefebvre and his rhythm analysis, which I moved away from. I still think a lot about rhythm, but actually tried to think it through different conversation in terms of Carnatic music. But I thought that was a bit too much for you urbanists to start talking about such things like that. Save it for the anthropologists. And but I think about this similar to actually Lefebvre in quite a lot of his work in a sort of triadic dialectic way. So it's not necessarily moving always forward. There is, of course, the possibility for linearity, but these are in conversation with one another. So to go back, it is not an order, not with and then on and then for, or the other way around. These are in constant conversation with one another in producing the distinct rhythms of waiting in the lives of these auto rickshaw drivers. So I don't think there's necessarily a move from one through to the other. And I'm sorry, there were you did give me 5 questions at once. And I think in terms of then, it's not necessarily only a spatial argument because you actually need to make something which is the importance there is the repetition, because you can't create any forms of solidarity or sociality without repeated interactions, which is why something like a rickshaw stand, even though they're not designed to create solidarity, they're not designed to create sociality, they do because it's the same people at the same time every day. Like rickshaw drivers have a very distinct temporality based on the needs of serving on the rest of the city, and that forces them together at certain times. And I think that's very important as well. So you have to think through time and space together when you think through these multiple rhythmicities. I'm not going to speak like an idiot. Rhythms of everyday life. And maybe just a very, very final question about smaller cities and the different types of people who are waiting. So auto rickshaw drivers are by and large local. There's not really they're not a migrant population. They're a local population. The local population of Mangalore has done quite well so far, those who are landowners and of making significant amount of money coming together, selling their land for real estate developers. And so a lot of the imagination of Mangalore, which is very speculative, by the way, because a lot of these high rises are empty, a lot of the luxury apartments are empty, sold to NRIs who have a root in Mangalore, who are now working abroad and want to have some property at home. So a lot of people have done quite well, not everybody, but quite a lot. And so there's definitely different I should stop talking, shouldn't I? No. And there's definitely different types of people who are, and of course, class and caste come into this very strongly. Also, it's very complicated because there's a very specific form of land in this part of coastal Karnataka called Mulagar land, which is rental land, rental agreements that have existed for hundreds of years. Where the landlord leases out the land to the tenant, but at a fixed rate, and it can never change. So there's land which you can rent it, which is rented in Mangalore for 2 rupees and a chicken a year, right? Which is worth, of course, now insane amounts of money. And so now there's ongoing court cases going on about how this land will be transferred, but it's another form of waiting as well, which is going on, waiting for this to be resolved. So the land where the high rise was being built, the aquamarine, that was Mulagar land, and the real estate developer managed to get both parties together, managed to sort out both with the Mulagar and the tenant to get the land, or what they thought was a great price, because they didn't know that the ring road was going to be built in a case. So it's very sort of differential forms of waiting depending on class, caste, and the type of knowledge people have. I'll shut up now. Thanks.
Okay. Next, we have Shaunima, who will be joining us online, who will be presenting on the Transitioning Collective Labor Agency of Kerala's software industry.
Am I audible?
You are audible. We can hear you and we can see your slides.
Okay. I'm Shonima. I'm from Center for Development Studies. My paper titled Transitioning Collective Labor Agency, Multiple Geographies of um, one second. Multiple geographies of constrained labor agency in Kerala software industry. It's a part of my PhD thesis that looks into the labor process question and labor agency question. And the thesis and the paper is motivated to understand the uh, changing meaning of collective labor agency in the rapidly globalizing world, where flexible regime increasingly challenge the traditional notion of labor organizing and resistance. And this is much more complex in the case of knowledge intensive services like IT and software industry, because where there exists control as well as autonomy, that these two things coexist simultaneously. And when we look into the case of existing studies, there are several studies that explore the constraints of collective labor agency in Indian scenario. However, this literature broadly looks into two factors. One, it looks into the professional identity factors and states how the global corporate culture has transcended the neoliberal thoughts and individualism and entrepreneurship among employees, and how it hinder employees from developing a collective consciousness and making apathy towards collective association. On the other hand, this literature looks into the managerial strategy and how far it differ from the traditional assembly line direct supervision. So when we look into the existing literature, the missing link is that this body of literature undermined the regional peculiarity of the area and conceptualized the question as one shaped only by the global trends while neglecting the socio-political context specific to the region. So the research question of the paper is how has collective labor agency transitioned in the context of global and local structural constraint within the software knowledge intensive industry in Kerala. For this purpose, the study conducted a case study of Pradidwani. Pradidwani is an employee welfare association of software employees in Technopark, Cyberpark, and Infopark, Kerala. Pradidwani is the largest employee welfare association in the IT employees in the state. And the particular choice of Pradidwani is important because of um, twofold. It's very important in twofold. On one hand, Pradidwani located in Kerala, and Kerala's labor history and the labor history is marked by organized labor movement, trade union movements, and a lot of labor movements in its sense with a trade union presence. And Pradidwani is a non-traditional employee union. And the imagination, mobilization, made demand, and organizational practices that Pradidwani adopts differ. So the methodology for the study is a qualitative case study approach, and for that purpose, the study has conducted semi-structured interview with various stakeholders, including office bearer of Pradidwani, Pradidwani members, IT employees, residents association members, service providers, and members of service provider trade union. So the analytical framework for the paper is it draws the concept of multiple geographies of constrained labor by Cohen layer. Uh, According to the framework, the labor agency conceptualized that both the intention and practice of taking action for one's own self-interest or interest of others, it is the capability of laborers to act, to change, to challenge, and resist the labor capital relation. Labor agency can be individual, associational, formal, informal, spontaneous, or goal-directed. And this particular paper looks only into the collective labor agency. In that sense, the conceptualization of labor agency has its own limitation. And labor agency, according to the paper, can be manifested in various forms such as trade union, workers' cooperative, welfare association, and so on. And constrained labor agency is conceptualized as the capability of labor agency constrained by structural factors such as institutional framework, economic condition, and social context. And in the case of Cohen layer, they also draws the understanding of constraint, multiple geographies of constraint agency from the idea of morphogenetic approach of constraint agency by uh, Margaret Archer. And according to morphogenesis cycle, there is a dynamic interplay between structure and agency. Therefore, there will be a transition, or there will be three stages in case of structure and agency dynamics. The first stage is structural conditioning stage. The second stage is social interaction stage, and the third stage is structural elaboration stage. Following the note of Margaret, following the notes of Archer, the Coe and Lyer state that there will be four stages in case of structure and labor agency dynamics. The first stage is geographies of structuring. The second stage is geographies of imagination. And the third stage is geographies in action. And the fourth stage is geographies of action. The first stage is the stage that refers to the existing social structural context that include the institutional setup, socio-political and economic condition, and existing class politics, culture and norms which shape the labor agency. It highlights the constraints and opportunities that an agency faces. The second stage is geographies of imagination. The phase refers to the phase of aspiration, belief, and narratives that influence workers' perception and motivation. This is a phase of reflexivity, intentionality, and imagination for the future on the basis of T1 stage. The third stage is geographies in action. This phase includes the immediate practices and strategies employed by the workers to navigate their environment. This reflects the day-to-day realities of labor agencies, their agential practices, and spatial strategies. And the final stage is the geographies of action. This encompasses the broader outcomes of this action. This stage maps the long-term structural changes that arise from the labor agencies. And this stage also refers to the structural elaboration phase. So, in the case of Kerala, Pradidwani, the structural context of the late 20th century marks the initial temporal point for the collective labor agency in Technopark. There are three important factors at this moment. Globally, there was a shift towards neoliberal regime and the popularization of global corporate culture. Consequently, regionally, at this phase is characterized by the transition of the state from pro-labor stance to pro-business stance. And when we looks into the production sphere, there was a white 20 crisis, and that also increases the demand for the outsourcing industry, particularly from India, where cheap labor was available. And during this period, both state and central government initiated software park, and they extend infrastructural support and tax supports to catalyze the business growth. And they give adequate institutional support and introduce weak enforcement of employment related laws. And in the Kerala, Technopark was established in the year 1990, and the state government was forthcoming to establish software technology park, special economic zone, and domestic tariff zone. And these three zones are the physical spaces that allow weak enforcement of labor law, including the lenient approaches to compulsory standing order, weak standing order facility, and they also ensure self-certification for labor policies. And the firms inside this segment considered to be public utility firms, and which also hinders the functioning of trade union. And when we looks into the Kerala's regional political dynamics, and though the introduction of a computer initially faced resistance from the workers, especially from the leftist group, the stand gradually shifted towards promoting the industry and computer. And this was also in the background of rising unemployment among educated youth and low manufacturing growth. However, the establishment and development of software segment in state has been significantly affected by the narratives of state's poor business environment and presence of militant labor agency. Therefore, both left and right government concern the narrative, and they ensures that there will be flexible uh, space for the functioning of software industry, and they make sure that there will be ease of business facilities for the functioning of the industry. And this hinder the formation of so-called trade union under the direct political support. Uh, but when we look into the case of Karnataka, Calcutta, and Chennai, we can see trade unions under the direct supervision of political parties. So this is the structural constraint. So from there, that from the agency from local level, the conflict promoted the employees to reconsider the possibility of forming association in alternative ways. So uh, that can be seen as the geographies of imagination phase. And upon this background, the employees were imagining a better environment. And in 2012, a collective association named Pradidwani was formed as a response to the insecurities that face uh, in cause of this changes. And the initial activities were more cultural activities, that is film and literature related programs rather than any employment related activities. But when we look into the third phase, that is geographies in action, when we look into the day-to-day activities of Pradidwani at this moment, there are various activities including technical forum, job portal forum, women's forum, Kalimutam, sports forum, literary club, and so on. So Pradidwani had has been expanded the domain of mobilization and taking up issues of job portal upskilling concern, and they engages with the cultural activities through literary club, film club, travel club, sports club, and environment club. They also engages with health and mental health well-being activities as well. And the woman cell engages in hostel and PG hunting action. And they also collaborate with the local association for shared interests like infrastructural facilities, bus issues, train issues. And they also coordinate with the residents association when there was a spontaneous event, that is entry issues at Nilagate. So they are extending the scales of organizing to community meetings and through social partnership. And at the same time, they are also engaging with the employment related issues like certificate withholding issues, salary withholding issues, Baiju's layoff issues, other mass layoff issues, and so on. So, when we looks into the geographies of action, we can say that a structural elaboration at this particular moment, but we need to emphasize the importance of drafting IT and ITES welfare scheme. That is first scheme nationwide. In Kerala, there is a welfare scheme for IT and ITES employees, but this also constrained by the structural factors that the neoliberal ideas among the employees considers the welfare scheme as a tax instead of a welfare scheme. So uh, there exists some kind of innovation in the form of welfare scheme, but that also constrained because of the existing norms among the employees. And another important geographies of action can be identified as the state intervention, direct state intervention at the time of mass layoff and all. So, in short, the discussion of the point is that uh, the Kerala is a state of large number of trade union with a large union density, but such kind of union is missing in software industry. And this particular thing is a trend of global thing, where globally the trade union in white collar segment is much limited. But at the same time, in particular case of Kerala, the regional factors also matters because both left and right government left and right parties, uh, they are afraid of the narration of non-business friendly environment in Kerala. So in that sense, the regional political thing also matters, that hinder the development of a trade union, and that also hinder uh, to intervene in certain actions like the Pradidwani is not engaging with the standing order issues, whereas KITU is engaging with the standing order issue. Pradidwani is more of Pradidwani's intervention is more of welfare related issues, whereas KITU's intervention is more of employment regulation, labor law regulations thing. So, on concluding remarks, we can't deny the geography or we can't deny the local factors. We need to emphasize both local and global dynamics in the case of in the case of a collective organization, even in the case of knowledge intensive segment. So thank you. I hope
Thank
I
you so
follow the time.
Thank you so much, Anima. Okay, are there questions from the audience? So, Shanima, I can just start off, and we have hands being raised here. I was I mean, I thought it was very curious at how many cultural activities the union was part of or was able to bring together. And I was wondering, in the formation of this union or this association, how far is their definition of the software worker? And how many kinds of people are there kind of able to let in? So, for example, when it comes to people who are doing data entry work at the for Digital India missions or for e-governance, are they someone who the union would consider as part of the economy that they are part of? Um, these are issues that we have with gig workers also, right? Where there is a whole kind of unionization and collective action happening amongst informal workers, which are transport workers. And then there are some very few ITES sector workers who see the gig worker as part of something they are part of. And both unions have very competing visions and imaginations on who the worker is, how to define that, what should be done with the sector. But I'm just wondering for this case what that would look like. And given that that they have a dependence or a relationship to those cultural activities, how classed is it? And then, yeah, maybe you can reflect on that. And we can just take 2 or 3 more questions. Charlotte and then Sahil.
Hi, thanks for your really interesting presentation, and I really liked your contribution to the concept of constrained labor agency, right? But I think I had more of a question towards your conclusion, which is that you emphasize the role of geography in sort of talking about, this particular concept of labor agency. And I feel like there's this conflation between geography and place in this sort of characterization, because I think even in geography there's debates on space versus place, where I think it's you've used geography in the sense of place, but I think it to me implies more of this expanded notion of space. So maybe this is, you can also take it as a comment at this stage. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the excellent presentation. I'm really curious about Kerala's left politics really being impacted so deeply by, the invocation of the hartal, the strike, and just wondering if this particular organization that you're studying, how does it deal with, the constant calls for hartal from ranging from a landslide situation to anything in the, any kind of industrial workforce related concerns. So how does it deal with that particular immobilization that Kerala, culture is quite has ingrained at a level where, it's part of its protest architecture, in some sense. Yeah, thanks.
Just go ahead.
So when we look at the history and geography of labor movements in Kerala, one thing which we can't deny is the library movements and literacy movements, and also the whole history of existence of labor movements among the informal workers, whether it is toddy tappers or choir workers or cashew workers and so on. So when we have a parallel history there in Kerala, especially when we look at the whole spatial aspect of labor movement, I just want to see that rather than placing this whole the episode of IT workers union as an alternative space of labor agency, how do you actually try to look at it along with the this kind of a labor movement which Kerala had already witnessed? Thanks.
Maybe you can answer these, Shanima.
Regarding the first question, how many cultural activities? The mobilization strategy of the Pradidwani itself is based on the cultural activities. They have a different kind of cultural forum, like film forum, literary forum, and so on. So even though people are not interested to join for collective union, the union adapts into kind of cultural organization and attract the employees into that. So in that sense, cultural practices is the important thing, and they have four 3-month programs like sports, series of sports events, series of film events, series of related cultural activities even. So in that sense, cultural activities is the uh, attracting label through which they showcases this thing and attract the employees, and from there they will start the discussion about employment issues, and they will have connection with the employees and so on. So it's very important in that sense. And regarding the, yeah, of course, the software and IT itself is a broad category. And even when we looks into the case of Akshaya workers, they can also be classified as IT employees, but they are not part of this thing. So only the employees from Techno Park, Cyber Park, and Info Park, and those who are part of firms, they are only part of this association. So in that sense, it does not encompasses the whole set of employees under the IT category. And regarding the theoretical question space and place, I'm not at this position to give a comment on this. I take it as a comment rather than a question. And regarding the left politics, yeah, when we looks into the case of Praditani itself, uh, though they are not affiliated to any political parties, they have political, uh, they are more of left kind of association, but they are not explaining they are not showcasing it in the forefront. So regarding, it's not in the case of Pradidwani, there are some other employee association in Technopark as well. All they want to does not want to highlight the factors of Kerala's hartal issues. They are, to some extent, they want to showcases that this place is a labor friendly space. So they want to showcases in such a way that, and in that sense, the direct labor related issues like standing order issues, such kind of labor law related things that hardly engages with. So in that sense, they are also want to maintain a face of not that much militant kind of in its nature. And regarding the movements in the no, informal sector workers and all those things, yes, of course, but this particular thing, uh, they are accepting the labor movement and all those things, but at the same time, it's because of the hesitance and apathy of employees regarding the idea of union. They are, to somewhat, they are changing their modes, and they are not accepting this kind of labor movement things, or to some extent they are representing themselves as a welfare association, and so it's in that sense.
Okay. Thank you so much for taking all the questions. And I realize this panel has gone over by half an hour, so I'm not going to make any large concluding remarks. Thank you, everyone who has presented and who's engaged deeply in the conversation online and here. Thank you all so much.